Welcome to the Grand Archive Trading Card Game Quick Start Guide. Grand Archive is an anime trading card game where players duel to defeat their opposing champions before losing their own. Let's get started.
Here are two champion cards. A champion is defeated when they accrue an amount of damage counters equal to or greater than their life stat. When a champion is defeated and you are the player with the last champion standing, you win the game. We'll talk about how these champions get on the field in the first place later. As you can see, we have two decks. One is called the Material deck, and the other is the Main deck. The Material deck consists of Champion and Regalia cards. These cards originate from the homeworld and will aid you in your duel. You may look at these cards at any time. The Main deck consists of cards that you will draw into your hand during regular play. These consist of various different card types. We'll go over a few of them in this video. But before we do that, let's go over what all cards have in common. This is the card's elemental requirement. We need to have this element enabled before being allowed to activate this card. This card requires the normal element, which is enabled for all players at the start of the game. Here is the card's reserve cost, indicated by the yellow circle. It's basically the card's activation cost. To pay for this cost, we must place that many cards from our hand face down into the memory zone, but remember, we can only do this if we have the required element enabled. The cards you reserve into memory aren't lost forever. You'll get them back during your next turn. Now let's go over some common card types, starting with ally cards. Allies are summoned onto the main field, the same field where your champion resides. They have an attack and life stat. Allies can attack as long as it's currently your main phase and that ally is awake. Being awake means that the card is in portrait orientation, while being rested means that the card is in landscape orientation. When allies attack, that ally becomes rested, and the controller must declare what target they are attacking. If the target is an opposing ally, that ally has an opportunity to retaliate if they are awake. Doing so rests that ally. When an ally attacks into a retaliating defender, they both deal damage to each other. Defenders get to deal damage back only if they are retaliating. Allies die if the damage they take in a single turn is equal to or greater than their life stat. Keep in mind that allies can attack the turn they enter the field, but doing so makes them rested, not being able to retaliate during the opponent's turn. Action cards are cards that have one-time effects. They are great for providing boosts in tempo advantage and are common in many deck types. These cards have a speed stat. If the action card says slow, that means it may only be activated during your main phase, and only if there are no other card effects being resolved. However, if the card says fast, it can be played in response to other effects. It can also be played during any phase and even on another player's turn. Attack cards allow your champion to attack, similar to an ally. Activating an attack card requires your champion to be awake. It becomes rested as you declare an attack target. This attack deals damage to the target equal to the attack card's attack stat and can be retaliated against as well. Now that we know how to use our cards, let's go over the phases of the turn. When we first start our turn, we enter the Wake Up phase. During this phase, all cards on our main field wake up. Next is the Materialize phase. During this phase, we may activate up to one card from our Material deck. Unlike the cards in our hand, the cards in the Material deck have a memory cost instead of a reserve cost, which is indicated by a blue circle. To pay for a memory cost, we must banish that many cards currently in our memory zone at random. Because of the random nature of paying for memory costs, the player must be very careful of what cards they put down to pay for reserve costs. After the Materialize phase, we enter the Recollection phase, where we return all cards from our memory zone to our hand. Then we draw a card for our Draw phase, and immediately move back into our Main phase, which is where most of our plays occur. After the Main phase, there is the End phase, which is when end of turn effects end and temporary damage on all ally cards are removed. Now that we've learned how to use our cards and how the turn cycle flows back and forth, there's only one more thing to cover. Let's take a look at how a game begins. After randomly deciding on who goes first, the player that does puts a level 0 champion from their Material deck into play at the start of the turn, and skips immediately to the main phase. These level 0 champions draw you an opening hand of cards and usually enable an element for the player. This dictates how their deck should be built. The level 0 champion can level up into higher level champions during the materialized phase by paying a memory cost. Note how the champion's life stat increases when they level up, allowing them to take more damage counters before perishing on the battlefield. New and stronger elements are enabled with certain champion levels, unlocking a variety of cards for us to activate. After this turn, the next player gets to put a level 0 champion of their own into play from their material deck. Then, they skip to their draw phase, allowing them to draw a card before their first main phase. Now, you've learned how to play a basic game of Grand Archive. For additional information and tips, please refer to the info sheet or booklet included in the Grand Archive Starter Deck products. Thanks for watching this quick start guide for the Grand Archive trading card game. We hope you emerge victorious in your fight for divinity.